I am very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Renata, who will be discussing Global Food Safety Initiative, Advancing Food Safety Worldwide. Renata is responsible for providing food safety consulting services and for developing, maintaining, and upgrading the resource materials and consulting tools used at NSF-GFTC for its consulting projects. She's a qualified trainer for NSF-GFTC, facilitating HACCP training courses across North America. She's worked closely with national food industry associations in developing food safety programs that support the Canadian regulatory system, as well as GFSI standards, and regularly consults with food industry clients across industry sectors in developing their GFSI compliant programs, and leading those teams through to successful certification. Renata has extensive experience managing vendor audit programs, implementing a variety of HACCP and food safety programs, and managing product testing functions. Renata has a degree in toxicology from the University of Guelph. And I will embarrass Renata a little bit, because I've got the microphone. Renata, I will say I'm new, returning back to NSF-GFTC. I was gone for about 2 years, but came back just about 2 weeks ago. But prior to leaving, I had spent 10 years with the GFTC, had the pleasure of working with Renata, in fact, participating in interviewing Renata. And the thing about Renata that I absolutely love is her passion, and she said this during the interview, she wants to make a difference. Renata is all about making a difference. So I think Renata is a poster child for everything you want out of anybody when you want to hire a consultant or work with anybody, whether it's industry or government. You want somebody who cares and wants to make a difference. So now that I've set her up, she will come up here and make a difference to discuss about the GFSI program. Please join me in welcoming Renata.
Thank you, Paul, for that terrific welcome. I'm going to wait for my red to go away from my face. So I'm going to be talking about something a little different now. I know we've been talking a lot about economics and about trade, and so I'm going to spend the next little while talking about food safety. And it's going to be along a little bit of a different vein. We talked a lot about how, different countries, there's different regulations, the differences between EU and Canada, and so I'm going to talk about GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, which is actually along a different vein, looking to make food safety standards equivalent globally. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit. I don't know if any of you have heard of NSF-GFTC. As a consumer, I continue to be surprised about where I can find the NSF logo. So I see it on hand dryers, I see it on the inside of my dishwasher, I saw it on the front of my blender the other week when I was looking to make a smoothie. And so NSF is really well known for establishing standards for public health and safety, for testing to those standards, and certifying products. So I work within our food safety division, and so a lot of what we certify is food companies to food safety standards. So we have an office here in Guelph, right on campus actually, attached to the food science building. Maybe some of you have had the pleasure of taking a tour through there. We offer a pilot facility there, so we help food companies that are looking to develop new products, expand their product lines, do some testing on site. We do training, food safety, so as Paul mentioned, we offer food safety training, HACCP to the GFSI standards. We've got a big auditing group, and it's a lot of what we do is go out and audit food safety or companies to ensure that their food safety standards are in place. As well, we've got labeling and packaging services as well, looking for companies looking to see if they meet the Canadian regulations for food labeling. So GFTC has joined the NSF family almost 3 years ago. All right, so GFSI, has everyone heard of GFSI? Sort of, some, okay, a couple hands, thank you for that. So GFSI started, and so we'll sort of start with the history of how it came to be with the Consumer Goods Forum. And so this is a retailer-based organization. And so it's an independent industry network of retailers, not just food retailers. And so what they found, sort of looking at the interest of these retailers, sort of around the year 2000, there was a lot of food safety issues. We were seeing a lot of bad publicity when it came to food safety. We were seeing customer confidence that was waning when it came to food products. And so the Consumer Goods Forum came together and created this Global Food Safety Initiative. And so it launched in May of 2000. And that's sort of the history of how it came to be. And the Consumer Goods Forum continues to manage the GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative. And so what GFSI is a not-for-profit foundation. And so it was established really to look at this confidence or lack of confidence in the food industry and see what could be done to improve that. We also saw, sort of during this 2000 time, this proliferation of audits, different auditing schemes, right? Some companies were getting audited to AIB, some had a silica audit, some required a GFTC audit. And so we were seeing all these requirements in the food industry continuously being audited. We didn't know how these audits were equivalent, right? So was an excellent rating from one audit company equivalent to a good rating or a gold rating from another? And so GFSI really came together to create some equivalence. Sort of, in simple terms, what should a good food safety audit include? What elements should that good food safety audit include? That's sort of really that mission of GFSI. And so we sort of considered the year 2007, that big sort of breakthrough year for GFSI. Although they'd been working since May of 2000 to create some standards to improve customer confidence, we saw in the year 2007, it was really Walmart that we saw drive this GFSI standard to sort of where it is today. And maybe some of you received a letter from Walmart that said you must be certified to one of these GFSI standards in order to be able to supply food to us. And so initially, Walmart provided 1 year for compliance. That didn't happen, right? Imagine all the food companies supplying to Walmart. We couldn't come on board fast enough. And so Walmart still to this day maintains that standard that GFSI is required for any of their food companies. And we have seen a huge uptake by most major retailers. Costco, Loblaws, all the big retailers in Canada are requiring GFSI certification in order to be able to supply. So a little bit about that GFSI vision. So safe food for consumers everywhere is what they're looking to achieve. Let me try and follow along in my notes here. Sorry if I speak a little quickly, slow me down. I get really excited sometimes when I talk, just like Paul said, I get a little bit nerdy when I talk about food safety and I get excited. So I'll try and pace my speaking. So the GFSI mission is to provide continuous improvement in food safety management systems, again, to ensure that confidence, right, in the customers, in the consumers for the delivery of safe food. And the real idea is at the bottom here, one certified, accepted everywhere. And that's where I sort of spoke in the beginning about this global idea of a food safety standard. So once you have one of these GFSI audits, the idea is no matter where you supply globally, this audit is recognized and accepted. And the standards are understood that you're meeting those food safety fundamentals. So it's really the vision of GFSI is once you're certified, you're accepted everywhere, whether in Canada, the EU, anywhere across the world. So the objectives of GFSI is to reduce those food safety risks, right? And all of us, we're all listening to the news, we're reading, we know that food safety risks make the news. They make big news, right? And they can absolutely affect a brand. So that's one of GFSI's objectives is to reduce those food safety risks. They want to manage cost in the supply chain. So there's the idea again. One audit should be able to satisfy many different customers, many different retailers, so that we're not continuously being audited as a food manufacturer, that one audit should satisfy many requirements. GFSI also looks to develop competencies and capacity building. Okay, so again, throughout the world and exchanging that knowledge and networking. Because what we found working in the food industry, food safety is not competitive, right? That's not the competitive part of our business. We know if one industry or one company is affected by a food recall, that whole industry will suffer from it. So we know food safety is not a competitive aspect of our business. And so GFSI looks to help support that exchange of knowledge and that networking to support food companies in producing safe food. So this is just a little bit about how GFSI is structured and what that governance is. So sorry I don't have any like pie charts and graphs and stuff. There's like no percentages. So the GFSI board is made up of 18 board members, and we're seeing some really big companies sitting on that board. So McDonald's, Cargill, Danone, Walmart, sitting on this GFSI board. And so we see on the right, the Consumer Goods Forum still manages that GFSI board, and there's a reporting structure there. We've also got stakeholders coming in, providing their feedback to the board. And so stakeholders include manufacturers, right, consumers, retailers. And so what's really interesting is about the structure of GFSI and the governance is these sort of three pillars you'll see at the bottom. So there are benchmark committees, and so we'll go through a whole sort of slew of definitions, but there's a committee that will decide on if an audit scheme meets the basic requirements of GFSI for a good food safety audit. And so there are committees put together to look at those standards. GFSI also has local groups. So around the world, they have local groups looking at how their standard will mesh with local regulations, but as well, they look to team up with those government bodies. And so what's really interesting is that we're seeing, for those of you that are following along, we've got some fairly new regulations in the US, so FSMA, and we've got some new preventative control regulations that have come out. We know the Safe Food for Canadians Act is waiting on some regulations. What we are seeing is that these new regulations are taking shape and really sort of fitting in nicely to the way GFSI has set up their scheme. So we're seeing regulations and this private standard really coming together and looking very similar. And so that's what these local groups are working with those government organizations on those food safety issues. And then there are some technical working groups within GFSI. So there's a group that works on the guidance document. So we've got a guidance document that really outlines what those requirements of GFSI are and how it should be managed. There's a group looking at auditor competence, and this has sort of been a really big topic around that GFSI or food safety certification, is making sure, or how do we make sure that we have competent auditors coming to our facilities? We can have these beautiful standards written, vetted by all these committees, but it really comes down to the auditor coming into a facility and taking a look at the programs and seeing if they meet the requirements. And so how do we make sure that we're sending competent auditors into those facilities? So GFSI has a technical working group looking just at that specific topic. There is a global markets program, which we'll talk about a little bit further along, but this is for those emerging companies, maybe even those emerging countries that don't have those full food safety regulations in place. So it's a bit of a stepwise approach into coming into the GFSI fold. And then as well, within those working groups, there are some strategic projects. So any sort of trends that are being seen in industry or any food safety issues that are coming up, technical working groups are put together to address those. So food fraud is one of those topics we're all hearing a lot of news about. And again, GFSI has put together a working group to address food fraud, how are they going to address it within their standards. So here are some of the drivers for private standards. And we get asked about this a lot. You know, we know there's regulations in Canada and the US, different countries in the EU. You know, what are the drivers for these private standards? And so we know our government is busy reacting to food safety events. So when there's a big food safety issue, governments are focused on solving those issues and containing them. Government is generally responsible for regulatory oversight and that surveillance. And what we are seeing increasingly is that those government regulations are pushing the responsibility for food safety to the manufacturer. So they're moving from a very inspection-based system to a much more oversight-based system and a risk-based approach where they're saying, hey, food manufacturer, this is your ultimate responsibility. We're here just to check and oversee once in a while, but really this is your responsibility. So we're seeing government sort of moving back from that inspection role they used to have. And so the markets themselves, we are seeing private labels being more and more prominent in the grocery store. Our product life cycle is much shorter. Like, we have to innovate. We're consistently changing our labels. We're seeing trends coming along, whether it's gluten-free. We heard about non-GMO previously, right? So we're seeing shorter and shorter product life cycles. We know there is always that question of liability and due diligence. If a food safety issue happens, where is that due diligence? Where is that liability? And even on the retailer side, where is the retailer's due diligence in selecting their suppliers? So we know these private standards are a big driver in that area. We also see this expanded supply base. So our food is coming, right, from all over the world. And here we are trying to encourage our food to move to different parts of the world. And so we see that expanded supply base. And then consumers themselves, right? We're all consumers of food products. We are much less loyal than we used to be. We're purchasing products that are on sale or products that are new and innovative. We are less loyal to brands than we used to be. And so we're always searching for that novelty. We know consumers are absolutely informed. They're concerned about the types of food that they're eating, and they're very vocal about that. We've got social media now, and we can see that. We see on Facebook, Twitter, I don't even know what all the new ones are, but we see that the consumers are vocal. So they're vocal with what they want and with what they see in your food products. So if they see an issue, hey, I just bought this, they take a picture of your product, perhaps a foreign material they found in it, and suddenly it's all over the web, right? And that's where we're seeing this push for these private standards, where manufacturers are seeing the benefit of putting a standard in place that they can be certified to help prevent some of those issues as a risk management strategy. And of course, consumers are health conscious. We heard in the talk earlier today, I guess that's one of the big trends we're seeing in food products, or what Europe is looking for is those health-based type products. So here we're going to sort of have a few definitions. So an accreditation body, and so GFSI is part of, its mission to create this food safety standard and have it applied globally. We need to have some checks and balances in place along the way. And so an accreditation body is commonly linked to a government, and they operate under an ISO standard 61 if you're interested in reading it sometime. And they provide oversight to one another as well. So each accreditation body is also part of an international accreditation organization. So here we look at ANSI, so our American Standards Institute. In Europe, we see UKAS, our example of those accreditation bodies. Then we talk about certification body. Okay, so this is the organization accredited by that authorizing body to undertake third-party assessment of those management systems to award and withdraw certificates of registration to the standards. Okay, so we have a certification body that sends out auditors that can award certificates to a food manufacturing facility. Each of those certification bodies must operate under a certain standard, and they're accredited by ANSI. So NSF, we're a certification body, and we're audited. So we're an auditor, and we're audited to make sure that we're following the proper protocol for awarding food safety certification. So we are accredited to certify against BRC, SQF, FSSC 22000, Global GAP, and Canada GAP are a few of those schemes, those certification standards that meet the GFSI benchmark. Well, here's a little picture. Okay, so we've got here our suppliers, which is some of us at the bottom. The audit company comes in and audits to make sure we've got good food safety programs and good quality management systems in place. So the certification body, NSF, maybe there's a few others, we don't need to name them. And we are accredited by ANSI, which is a member of the International Accreditation Group. So here are what we call the schemes. So the audit standards themselves, these are what we call the scheme owners, and they provide a license to those certification bodies to be able to issue those certifications on their behalf. And this is where GFSI comes in and benchmarks those schemes against their standard. It's confusing? No, good. So how does that benchmarking process work? What is that? And it's a word we use often. And so this is the procedure by which the food safety scheme, so an audit owner, so let's say SQF or BRC, they have a food safety audit that they've developed. They need to submit that audit to GFSI. GFSI will use their guidance document and compare and say, hey, does this audit meet all of our criteria for a good food safety audit? If GFSI thinks that it meets all the standards, you're benchmarked, and then you become one of those GFSI accredited schemes. So schemes are benchmarked and recognized to have common foundational requirements, but sometimes they cannot all be considered identical because they differ in their level of prescription. So again, a lot of the fundamentals are the same, but they read very differently. So depending on if you choose BRC, there's very specific requirements. SQF has different requirements as well. For example, SQF certification requires an unannounced audit once every 3-year cycle. BRC doesn't have that requirement. Though they both meet this global standard, they have slight difference in how they're executed and how they're written. So these schemes, right, so these audits are the standard. So the standard is maybe something you're used to seeing, right? You need to have smooth, cleanable walls, right? You need to have sanitation program in place, written sanitation procedures. You need to have management commitment in place, a policy statement showing that your management is committed, right? So those are the auditable standards, those specific wording that the auditor is looking for, as well as the management system around that. So how is that going to be audited? What's that audit cycle look like? When does an auditor need to come in? What's the score you need to achieve? And that's what we sort of call that audit scheme. So this is the GFSI guidance document, and we are in our 6th edition. And if you're very curious, it's available online. It's like an interesting read for me. I don't know if for you, but certainly it's available online, and you can definitely take a look at it and download it. That guidance document is updated on a regular basis. And again, that's one of those objectives, the vision of GFSI. They want to stay current. So we just don't make a standard and walk away. So at least every 4 years, that GFSI guidance document is updated. Again, we see trends emerging in the food industry. We see new risks emerging. We see the food industry is changing, right? Over the last several years, the amount of technology that we've implemented. So this guidance document is updated on a regular basis, and it's created with global industry input. And again, remember, we have that GFSI board with the stakeholders that are providing their feedback. So these board members are active members of the food industry, and so they're helping to drive what should be in those standards. And so that document ensures that requirements for food safety management schemes are robust, and it also includes procedures for benchmarking. So of course, GFSI has their own SOP for how they're going to approve and benchmark. So version 6.3 was issued in 2013. So GFSI schemes definitely go above and beyond just the basic requirements of HACCP and GMPs, right? So we're saying that's sort of the basic requirements, and a lot of what our government regulations currently require is basic GMPs and HACCP. GFSI is going above and beyond what those basic requirements are, and includes things like having product specifications, testing, analyzing your product. How do you purchase your product? Who do you purchase it from? How do you approve your suppliers? How do you check your suppliers are sending you what you had asked for, right? So there's some purchasing procedures required. And they're all based on this internal audit system. So GFSI is looking for us to be improving and maintaining our food safety system and making any corrections on our own. So not waiting for the auditor to come in and, hey, gotcha, I found something. They're looking for us as the food industry to be looking at our own systems and making corrections in our own process. So they want us to have an internal audit function within that food safety management system. And of course, that full product traceability. And I saw that traceability word in a slide earlier today. We absolutely must have that full product traceability. So where did that product come from? Where did we use it in our facility? And where did we ship that to? That full traceability. So what GFSI does not do? So they don't make policies for retailers, for manufacturers, or for standards owners. Okay, so they don't make those policies. They don't perform audits on their own, and that's a really common point of confusion. Oh yeah, we have this GFSI audit. GFSI doesn't audit anything, right? They're the ones that are benchmarking those schemes, so you would have an audit to SQF, to BRC, right? So GFSI really just creates that standard. What should that good food safety audit include? And they don't benchmark any other area other than food safety. Okay, so that is their focus, just on food safety. We know some of our standards include quality components. GFSI benchmarks just to food safety. So here are the benchmarked schemes for 2015. Maybe you've seen some of these names before, maybe you have not. So IFS, and this may be something we see a little bit more in Europe than we do here in North America, the IFS scheme, Primus GFS, GRMS for the meat industry, the FSSC 22000, which is based on an ISO type management system. BRC coming out of the UK, so the British Retail Consortium has a food standard as well as a packaging and packaging material standard. And we have seen within our group a huge uptake in the amount of suppliers packaging and packaging material suppliers that are looking to become certified to one of these food safety standards. SQF is probably, I would say, the most common audit scheme we see within North America, and certainly with NSF. Within NSF, this is the scheme that we audit to most often. Canada GAP in aquaculture for producers, Global GAP, and then Pack Secure IFS, so another packaging scheme. These are all available on the GFSI website as well. So here is a little picture to show us where those certifications might apply. So we see in the center there from on-farm to retail, right? So that sort of farm to fork we always keep hearing about. So some of those schemes are designed specifically for those on-farms. So Primus, Global GAP, Alliance Global Aquaculture, Canada GAP are schemes designed specifically for the growers. So the orange is for food processors, so IFS, BRC Food, GRMS are for those food processors. And then that, I don't know if it's purple or brown, so BRC storage, packaging, and logistics on the transportation, storage, and logistics side. This is an area that we are expecting to see a lot of uptake as well, because we've seen the on-farm requiring certification in processing, absolutely. Packaging suppliers are taking this on, and so now we're seeing distribution companies looking to get certified. We're seeing those trucking companies, we're seeing brokers starting to get put in the fold of this GFSI. And so we see at the bottom, FSSE 22000 and SQF, those two standards are designed just the way they're set up. They can address any one of those farm-to-fork producers. And it's a common question we get. We'll sometimes get a phone call from a client. Okay, we want to supply Walmart and we need to be GFSI. What do I do? Where do we start? And so a lot of the discussion is sometimes choosing which standard works for you, which one is most applicable. And so they are all relevant. They're all GFSI benchmarked. Again, some of the nuances will depend on the type of business that you operate. So here are some of the GFSI scopes. And again, it's sort of hard to read, but really it just goes to point out that there are different requirements for different types of processors. And then identifying these different product categories also helps to speak to that auditor competence where we know that we sometimes have an issue. So these schemes require the auditor must have some industry experience in the area that they are auditing. And so we're hoping that helps to align some of those auditor competency questions that come up. Oh, missed one. So GFSI, their strategy for 2016 and beyond. Did I miss one? Oh, okay. So again, they're looking to engage more and more, GFSI is, with governments, international organizations, so like the World Trade Organization, like Codex, and again, like we're seeing with these North American standards that are very much lining up their regulations with what GFSI is looking for. There's consideration for requiring unannounced audits. So again, we know SQF has already written that into their standard that once every 3 years, the audit must be unannounced. And we are fully expecting most of the other audit standards to start picking up on that as well. We know some retailers, Costco for example, is requiring unannounced audits. I believe Walmart in the UK has put the same requirement that audits need to be unannounced. So what this is speaking to is that the food industry has become very good at passing audits. We're very good at knowing what to do, what to say, how to pass audits. And so this is sort of that next step, challenging the industry further to always be audit ready. You need to be ready at any moment for an auditor to come in, start asking you those questions. Not wait for that big clean up 3 days before, wash everything down, put it away, right? Some of you are nodding. For sure that happens, for sure. So we're looking really, and that's sort of one of the buzzwords that we're seeing, is to be audit ready. And so we're also looking at the review of the pet feed and retail wholesale requirements. So I saw pet feed as well in a presentation earlier this morning. They're looking to incorporate pet feed into the GFSI requirements, right? So we're looking to put human food standards to pet food. And as well, how does the retailer fit into this? Because we're seeing that question all the time, right? Manufacturers are saying, wow, you're putting all these requirements on us. Well, what about you, retailer? What about what you're doing? What are you doing in your store? How are you handling our product? Right? So GFSI is looking to answer some of those questions and some of those pressures on the retail side. And so we are expecting the new GFSI document to be out in 2016. We're hearing the word March. So what that means is that when GFSI comes up with their new guidance document, their new requirements, all of the schemes are going to have to update their standards within a year. And that means all the manufacturers are going to have to update their programs to meet that new standard as well. So it's really this domino effect. So if you're eager, look out in March, go to the GFSI site, and hopefully we'll see a new guidance document and what those requirements might be. So what we are absolutely expecting to be in that new GFSI document is food fraud. We're expecting some standards to be written in there for companies, for manufacturers to be addressing food fraud, their vulnerabilities to food fraud. So we know this is making big news. We know about the horse meat situation. Earlier this year, we've had a big issue with peanuts or peanut shells being contaminated into our spices, right? We know there's dilution happening in some of our fruit juices. So if you look in the news, there's a lot of stories that are pointing to food fraud. So we know we're going to see that incorporated into our version 7 of the GFSI document. The BRC standard already has requirements in it to address food fraud. So we're going to expect to see those requirements in all the rest of the standards as well. So as a food manufacturer, start to think about that. How are we going to address it? What controls do we need to put in place? How are we going to assess, how are we even going to assess our vulnerabilities to food fraud? Right? How are we even going to tackle that question? And again, once it's in those schemes, the auditor is going to come to your facility and expect for those assessments, for that risk assessment to be in place, and then certification to that third-party audit. So we talked a little bit about the global markets program. So what GFSI has seen is that, or they know, their standard is nearly the best practice. And so how do these small manufacturers, how do they make that leap from what they're doing, maybe not even having basic GMPs, to this huge leap to this GFSI requirement? So they've created this global markets program, sort of a tool that helps companies step up to that GFSI standard. And so it's voluntary for the development of that food safety management system. And again, targets less developed companies, typically in primary production and manufacturing. And it really provides guidance. So I think it's about 35% of the requirements in GFSI are in this global markets program. So it's sort of taken some of those high level, those key items, put those ahead first, said, okay, let's implement these first as a step toward full GFSI implementation in one of those recognized schemes. So of course, we're doing this, all of this GFSI is really, we're putting it in place to manage risk. So we know the uptake has been huge. And again, thanks to that initial Walmart letter that we saw, we are absolutely seeing this GFSI requirement being embraced globally. So in 2013, 85,000 certificates were issued for GFSI recognized schemes in 162 countries. So again, in so many ways where we're seeing different requirements, GFSI is looking to create a global standard and a global sort of definition of what food safety should be so that we're talking the same language no matter where our food is coming from. And so 77,000 factories, 150,000 farms were certified. We saw those 10 food safety management schemes with 5 local groups. So we talked about those local groups in Europe and Asia, the Americas, helping to implement those GFSI networks regionally. We have over 100 companies, consultancies, organizations collaborating in those technical working groups. So GFSI is looking to be absolutely relevant. They're inviting comment, they're looking for industry feedback, they're looking to get the best information, the best technical experts to continue to update their standard. Over 15,000 stakeholders are following GFSI around the world. So what are some of the benefits? Right? We know we have to do it. Maybe we did get a letter from one of our retailers and said, you have to do this. Well, there are some benefits aside from you're going to get some extra business. We know that certified companies are more disciplined. They're typically more efficient and they're more profitable. And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience, any company that I have helped implement any sort of GMP, any HACCP system has absolutely become more efficient and profitable. We've seen waste reductions. We've seen product efficiencies. We've seen process efficiencies. So it absolutely makes a company more profitable. Certified companies show equivalence of process across countries. So where we see companies with facilities in more than one country, we're seeing more consistency across continents. Many buying companies recognize GFSI schemes, right? And so we're seeing that. We're not going to purchase from you unless you're certified, or you can't supply us unless you've got one of these GFSI schemes in place. Certified companies typically have a framework for that legal defense, and we hate to talk about it, but then it's in place, right? We have that documentation, that due diligence in place if we need to have that legal support. And working within that food safety management system, it's structured to be continuously improved. So the idea is not just get certified, put the certificate on the wall and carry on. GFSI schemes are really designed as that continuous improvement cycle within a facility. We find an issue, let's investigate why it happened, what kind of correction can we put in place, let's improve. And so they're structured to be continuously improved, and again, to those internationally accepted standards. So just as, this is sort of, I guess, my area where I work most often is implementing these GFSI schemes within companies, and it's really to know and understand your risk as a manufacturer. This is easier said than done, right? What are my risks? What could happen to my product? And so while we're implementing one of these food safety systems, it's to know and understand those risks. Of course, we want to choose the right scheme for our business. Okay, so we want the scheme to fit what we're doing. We want to build a robust, risk-based food safety system, right? So one that's going to last with our business and grow with our business, not just be put in place to pass an audit. We want to respond to consumer expectations for food safety, quality, and environment. It helps to build transparency and accountability, absolutely. We see a big management commitment piece, number 6, a requirement of these GFSI schemes, right? They require management to sit in on meetings, to be informed as part of the system, and then continually improve those internal systems and processes to enhance. And of course, we need to leverage technology. If there's any trend we're seeing, this is a big one. As food companies know, regulations are not going away. These private standard requirements are not going away. So how do we manage them all? And that's with with leveraging technology to manage those documents, manage that data, and use that data to improve your system. So that was just a quick GFSI overview. Are there any questions? We went through a lot of, yeah.
Is there any body within GFSI that would link up perhaps to EU alerts on products which are recalled or stopped at the border for perhaps contamination, safety issues? And I'm thinking about inputs in manufacturers here, like spices that are contaminated and they're being used in the production of the product and so on, or leakage of toxic components of metal. So all those kinds of potential risks that could crop up, and maybe a manufacturer here is unaware that there could be these problems in components that they're sourcing internationally.
Absolutely great question. So almost always when I'm teaching a food safety course, I encourage all the participants to sign up for recall alerts. So CFIA in Canada, you can sign up and be emailed any recall alerts for products. US the same. EU has a database. So I can send you that link if you'd like later, but EU has a database of exactly what you're saying, any product that was held, tested, rejected, so that you as a manufacturer can know ahead of time, right? Hey, is there an issue with one of my raw materials that I'm using? But also to learn from mistakes of your competitors. Absolutely, learn from their mistakes. If they're having an issue with leakage, any sort of toxic elements in theirs, wow, could this happen to us? As part of that risk-based analysis. So there absolutely is a database for that, and I can send you that link. Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, Renata, just a comment if you would.
Sure.
You talk about a lot of the different schemes, and I understand most of them. But in dealing with producers, a lot of producers are getting frustrated because you take Canada GAP, you get your certification, it's a GFSI certified scheme, but some US-based chains are saying, no, we want PTI oversight and pushing them onto different schemes that are not GFSI certified. So you're trying to sell within Canada to two different places, one of whom is US-based that doesn't want GFSI, and others that want GFSI. And so now you've got a producer that's having to do multiple schemes. Add on top of that now the private labels that are bringing in a lot of different sustainability schemes. And I'm just speaking, I think, for a number of producers that are saying, like, tell us what you want, but don't overload us with so much different, or so many different schemes. I'd just like your comment on that, because I think there was an understanding that SQF was going to be the global primary production standard. And yet it seems that there are many that are saying, no, we want this. And even into Europe, I deal with a member that sells into Europe, and they required Proterra.
Okay.
And so he goes out and gets that. And yet
And now
someone
you've
else
got
wants something else.
4 or
And-
5 audits that are happening in a
Exactly.
year.
And I'd just like your comment to that, because at the production level, I think you're seeing some frustration with just what is wanted.
Great comment, and you are definitely not the only one that is seeing those kind of issues. And GFSI is aware, and that's where their vision is: once certified, accepted everywhere, a vision, right? They know they're not there yet. And so that's where a lot of these local groups are working regionally to help spread that message that this audit is good, it's benchmarked, here's the process that we go through to make that accepted. In the meantime, we know that customers sometimes are the boss, right? And so we do what we need to, but GFSI is certainly working to address that, and we've seen that in their meetings and their agendas, that that's one of the areas that they need to work on to make sure that once certified, accepted everywhere really is happening. Yeah, great comment, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the answer. The question along the similar lines is one of the things that we have difficulty with at Carry On is what's actually acceptable and what isn't, and who's authorized by who. Like, you know, a wonderful presentation, but I see no Health Canada endorsement. I see no Canadian Food Inspection endorsement. I see no Agriculture Canada endorsement. We're here trying to produce the very best products to sell around the world. And everybody's kind of bumping around trying to do everybody else's job, it seems. You know, like, as example, Canadian Food Inspection Agency is world-renowned. They're doing things great. But we have all these other institutions running around with your HACCP program, your this, your that, and everything else. And as primary producers, like, my God, it takes longer to pretty well do the paperwork than it does to grow the turkey. And in time, you know, that time was spent in the barn where we should be. We could do a far better job. Like with the costs of this, you know, to be competitive and all that sort of stuff, it's quite a deal. You know, in our operations, we're getting licensed by a whole bunch of people that aren't recognized by anybody. Huge costs. Isn't worth the paper it's written on. And one could almost suggest that it's fraud. You know, like no, we're paying people to certify us to do stuff that aren't qualified to do it. And then when you get in trouble, nobody recognizes it.
Well, I can only speak.
How do we fix this?
How do we fix this? I can only speak to the GFSI scheme, and I know because we operate as a certification body. So to answer your question, you know, if you disagree with an auditor, or if there's a finding that you're not sure of, there's absolutely an appeal process that's built into that to help address some of those issues. I don't agree.
No,
with
are you
the finding.
recognized by CFIA? Could we take your thing and just export to the Netherlands?
So GFSI is not a regulation. So GFSI requires manufacturers to follow regulations. That's one of their standards. It says that the manufacturer must follow legislation in the country they operate and the country that they ship product to. So this is above and beyond really what those regulatory requirements are. This is really driven by retailers, by the retail requirements.
Okay.
Renata, yeah.
we can chat a little bit later if you like at the next break. How about that?
Okay.
Keep us on track.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. So in the interest of time, we're gonna cut the questions off there, but absolutely, we do have another break coming up, and Renata will be here for the remainder of the day. So please join me in thanking Renata, and also for stirring some really good conversation and questions as well, and as a token of our appreciation.